Welcome to Future Squared, the podcast all about corporate innovation, entrepreneurship, and self-empowerment. Future Squared brings you a double dose of innovation inspiration every week to help you and your company stay relevant in an era of rapid change and 10x your results in both your professional and personal life. Each week, I'll bring you corporate innovators, entrepreneurs, authors, keynote speakers, and thought leaders such as Steve Blank, David Allen, Brad Feld, Tim Harford, Karen Dillon, Jenny Blake, Neil Patel, Rand Fishkin, Pascal Finette, Ryan Blair, and Ash Moria, to name just a few. While every Friday, I'll bring you Fast Fix Friday, some quick, digestible insights to help you end your week on a high as you head off for the weekend. Future Squared is brought to you by Collective Campus, an innovation hub school and consultancy based in Melbourne, Australia and Singapore that works with companies to help them adopt the mindset, methods and tools to navigate change and survive and thrive in an era of rapid disruption. If your organization needs help coming up with ideas, testing and turning ideas into reality, incubating teams, driving cultural change, or connecting and partnering with startups, then visit www.collectivecamp.us. And without further ado, here's today's podcast. Welcome back to Future Squared. Today I speak with Andy Molinsky. He's a professor of international management and organizational behavior at Brandeis University's International Business School, with a joint appointment in the Department of Psychology. Andy received his Ph.D. in Organizational Behavior and M.A. in Psychology from Harvard University. He also holds a master's degree in International Affairs from Columbia University and a BA in International Affairs from Brown University. Andy's current work focuses on the challenges people face when adapting behavior in foreign cultural settings. His research has also explored the dynamics of psychologically demanding tasks, including necessary evils and organizational change. He's published widely in many top academic journals, and his work has also been featured in media outlets such as the Harvard Business Review, Forbes, The Economist, Fast Company, the Financial Times, the Boston Globe, the Chronicle of Higher Education, and on NPR. Andy's most recent book is called Reach, a new strategy to help you step outside your comfort zone, rise to the challenge, and build confidence. And it came out earlier this year, and it will form the basis of much of our conversation today. So if you're ready to get out of your comfort zone, strap yourself in and get ready for a conversation with the one and only Andy Molinsky. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Thanks for having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, and you're joining us all the way from Boston, Massachusetts.
That's right, Boston, Mass. I guess we're on a different day than you are in Australia, right? We're on Monday.
Yeah, well, you'd be on Monday night. We're Tuesday morning.
Exactly.
And you're a big Boston sports fan, I know.
Yes, huge Boston sports fan.
Yeah.
Yes, baseball, American football, basketball, and hockey. So pretty much the whole triumvirate here.
Yeah, so I think at the moment the Red Sox would be the only team that's actually playing right now. Everyone else is having their off season. Is that right?
Yeah, the Celtics just finished. The Patriots are in early training camp, and the Red Sox are on. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, your American sports, huh?
Well, look, I try, man. I try. I'm more of a basketball fan. I grew up being a massive fan of Charles Barkley's Phoenix Suns back in the early 90s, and I've stuck by that team for some reason, even though they have not won a single ring in ever, and it's been painful, but hey, I'm a loyal man. What can I say?
Interesting. Yeah.
So Andy, let's start off by saying that the comfort zone is a very beautiful place, but nothing grows there.
It's true. I guess nothing grows there, but I never want people to. So I wrote a book about acting outside your comfort zone, and and you see a lot of internet memes all over the place and inspirational posters as life begins only outside of your comfort zone and so on. But I don't want people to think that after listening to this podcast you should go run through a wall and step outside your comfort zone in every possible situation. There's some times and circumstances and situations where it's perfectly acceptable to stay in your comfort zone.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned there your second book. It's called Reach, a new strategy to help you step outside your comfort zone, rise to the challenge, and build confidence. And it came out earlier this year. But it makes a case for successful people not necessarily wanting to do the things most of us fear, but having found their own way to do them. So can you shed some light about that?
Yeah, so I really so I should say actually that for this book I did quite a bit of research. So I
Hmm.
spoke with managers, executives, entrepreneurs, lawyers, small business owners, and then I also talk to doctors and goat farmers
Goat
and
farmers.
rabbis and priests. I mean, I went across the board because I really wanted to sample broadly and understand in all sorts of situations too, from making small talk to networking to delivering bad news to public speaking,
Hmm.
all sorts of things. You know what I mean? To sample broadly. Um, I found there wasn't a one size all way of stepping outside your comfort zone, either in terms of the strategies people use, although I do boil it down to three key strategies,
Hmm.
or in terms of the challenges people face, although I also boil it down to five or six key challenges. But, it's a very individual experience stepping outside your comfort zone. And so I want people to know that it's not a one size fits all deal.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you've identified lots of different things, whether it's getting up on stage and speaking in front of lots of people, whether it's getting out to a networking event and just walking up to random strangers and saying hello. Jumping out of your comfort zone can mean very different things to very different people.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and it's interesting to hear how different people resonate with the book and the ideas. Some people are tell me that as lifelong introverts, they find this so useful because it's so difficult and frustrating for them to make small talk and network. Others say their bugaboo's been public speaking or being assertive, let's say, or standing up for
Mm.
themselves or speaking up in a meeting or I don't know, public speaking's a big one. Or stopping to be such a micromanager. I mean, there's all sorts
Mm.
of everyone at every stage. I find especially at transition points, right, from becoming a student to an employee, from becoming a sort of an employee to a manager, from becoming a manager to a leader.
Hmm.
And all these inflection points, I find that's where you're really required to step outside your comfort zone.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, from my own perspective, like when I look back on the last few years, some of the most rewarding character building experiences have definitely been when I have pushed myself to get out of my comfort zone. And in most cases, there was, anxiety was at an absolute high leading up to that event, whether it was, rap jumping off a building, more recently skydiving, traveling through Vietnam on my own, or leaving the corporate world to pursue starting my own company. I mean, each of these has delivered profound character building experiences that stand out in the memory. Whereas all of the little comfortable things like going out to my favorite restaurant or doing the same old gym routine day in, day out, it kind of blurs into nothingness. And that's not to say that you don't need both, the bread and the toppings in the sandwich, but it really is when I look back on life and when I tell stories, it's always those stories that have forced me to come out of my comfort zone that I tell.
Yeah, in your wow, it's impressive. You just rattled off like five or six things that like any one single one of those things. I'll bet a lot of listeners are saying, "Oh man, I wish I could do that." I think I think that's amazing. I think for a lot of us, stepping outside our comfort zone is like these little everyday acts of courage, right?
Hmm.
It's pretty. I work with people in addition to, so I do a lot of corporate speaking and I do training and I also do coaching, one-on-one coaching, and you know it takes a real act of courage to step into that networking event when every bone in your body is
Yeah,
wishing you could just run right down the stairs. Do you know
exactly.
what I mean?
Yeah, and there's that fear of social rejection, which I guess is just part of our evolutionary makeup that we don't want to walk up to a random group of strangers and have them, look at us like, who's this weird person just like coming in, barging in on our conversation.
Yeah, especially if you're not. I mean, some people who are more extroverted, very socially skilled, and so on.
Hmm.
They might actually get some energy from a situation like that, and others of us, will not only be depleted afterwards, but it's absolutely terrifying to not know what to say, not know what to say to begin to sort of edge your way in there, but even to continue the conversation. I mean,
Yeah.
it can be tremendously awkward. That's just one example of one situation, but I think a lot of people, if they really reflect, will find at least something in sort of their portfolio of situations in their life which requires stepping outside your comfort zone or which you're currently avoiding.
Hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that. And on your research, Andy, I mean, it argues that when it comes to, say, things like going to the gym, scaling a mountain, starting a new business, or as we've mentioned, speaking in front of, say, several hundred people. Five key challenges underpin our avoidance tendencies, and you've labeled them as authenticity, competence, resentment, likability, and morality. Let's dig into these challenges.
Sure. Yeah. So I don't want to say that you're going to necessarily experience every one of these challenges when you consider stepping outside your comfort zone, but any one of them can sort of cause you to not do it or to really experience some serious anxiety when you do it. So authenticity, remember, these are situations where you're sort of acting against the grain of your typical routine, style, personality. Authenticity is the idea that this is not me. This does not feel like me. I feel like an imposter, standing up and speaking in that meeting or putting on my grown-up voice, pitching to venture capitalists or whatever it is. It just doesn't feel like me. That's authenticity. Or actually, the lack of authenticity.
Yeah.
Competence. I can't do this well, the feeling inside. And by the way, I know other people know that. So it's not just the private, it's the public, right? Likability. People won't like this version of me. If I step outside my comfort zone and act in this new way, people aren't going to like me. They might even hate me, right? They might not respect me, and so on. Resentment. I know what I need to do to be effective, but I'm resentful. I'm frustrated that I have to do this. I was talking about introverts before. I can't tell you how many people I have heard from who are introverted who say, things like, it is so frustrating to me that what is going to enable me to get that great position, to get put on that key project, is my ability to make chit chat, small talk by the water cooler, to be able to play golf and schmooze and this and that. And it's not the quality of my work that matters, or at least that matters enough. And so that's an example of resentment around stepping outside your comfort zone. And then finally, morality. And I have to admit, I didn't hear this in a lot of stories, but I heard it in enough that I wanted to include it here. The idea that stepping outside my comfort zone in this situation, it feels wrong. It doesn't just feel inauthentic, or I don't just feel incompetent or fearful of my likability and so on. I actually feel like I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah. And in your research, Andy, when people have felt as if they lack authenticity or the competence to do something, how have they managed to bridge that gap? And I understand it would be different for different people.
Yeah. So bridging the gap entails not avoiding it, first of all, right?
Of course.
I think I have a whole section of the book about how we're great avoiders, and people come up with great ways to justify not doing something.
I haven't got time for that.
I hear you. So let's talk about what distinguished success from the lack of success. There were three things. The first was what I call conviction. Conviction is that sense of purpose, sort of, it's almost like giving yourself psychological permission to do something that's against the grain of what you'd normally do. And it's sort of that driving sense of purpose. It doesn't erase the discomfort, but it gives you that motivation and drive to push through the discomfort. And I find that, in general, frankly, I find two different kinds of conviction. One that's more professional, sort of like, I've always wanted to start that business. I've told myself my dream was to become an entrepreneur. I have always wanted to do X or whatever, or I know I strive to be a leader, and I know I'm going to have to public speak if I'm a leader, so I'm just going to figure out a way to do it. That's sort of professional. Personal's different. Personal I hear too, and I have to tell you, that's my personal strongest source of conviction always is personal. So like I have two kids, 10 and a 12-year-old, and I'm always trying to coax them outside their comfort zone as part of being a dad. And I have to tell you, like when I'm avoiding something or thinking about avoiding something outside my comfort zone, I start to think to myself, what kind of role model do I want to be here?
Yeah.
And that's a tremendous source of conviction for me. The point here is that, again, it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. Find yours and embrace it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it reminds me a bit of Tony Robbins. He talks a lot about how you can build belief in any certain situation to get outside of your comfort zone, and he mentions things like build your knowledge, read the right books, put yourself in an environment that will give you that confidence, visualize and think about past experiences. Where did you come out of that comfort zone in the past? If you've done it in the past, then chances are you can do it again.
Yeah, that's a good thing to remember, that you're
Mm,
probably more resilient than you think you are. If you really sort of like take an accounting of what you've done in the past. I actually wrote a Harvard Business Review article about exactly that. I think the
mm,
title was something like "You're More Resilient Than You Think You Are,"
right.
a couple of months ago. So,
Excellent.
yeah, no. So we got conviction. The second tool is customization. And I have to tell you, this is probably the most surprising / exciting thing I found in the book, in the research, because I think it's just really cool. And what customization is, it's the idea that you can tinker, you can tweak, you can find a minor slight adjustment in the way that you perform whatever task this is
Mm,
to make it just a little bit more comfortable for you. And I kept hearing examples of this. They didn't talk about it as, I customize, because they didn't have that language. They talked about it in their own terms, whether it was body language or the words they used, or
yeah.
bringing a prop, like a physical prop to a situation,
Mm,
or staging the context or the timing. I'll give you a couple of quick examples. Like these are from just sort of fresh off my email. The other day, I got an email from someone who said he was terrified of public speaking. This is a banker, until he was able to fly in his best friend. Now, this is, of course, an example of someone who's got the money, right?
mm-hmm.
But he flew in his best friend from New York to Boston, which is about an hour flight, for talks early in his career, and he'd have that guy sit 8th row center and just smile and nod.
Yeah.
And it was sort of like this built-in audience. And it's funny because Mark Twain, I talk about in the book, Mark Twain, the American, classic writer, he told a very similar story about, hey, he used to populate the audience with sort of buddies and friends, to overcome his public speaking anxiety.
Yeah.
Another cool example. I'll just tell you one more quick one. I got a message the other day from someone who's a introvert, and she's very uncomfortable in social situations. She gets very socially anxious. Just sort of more like friend situations, but it could be a professional too. And she goes to these parties and is sort of a wallflower and sits in the corner. But she didn't want that, and so she had this epiphany. She's really interested in photography, and she decided to try to bring a selfie stick to get together. And it was incredible. She said it was an absolute catalyst for conversation. People would come over, ask her what it was. She would respond, and they would think it's really cool, and they'd ask how to use it, and she'd help them. And in just a few minutes, she'd have this conversation. She would be exchanging emails with the photos, and so on and so forth. And it absolutely transformed her experience. That's an
Mm.
example of a prop. But my point here is there are a myriad of ways that you can find to just tweak your situation, just even in a little bit. And I find it tremendously helpful.
Yeah, and what you've said there about the public speaking and Mark Twain inviting his buddies to hang out in the audience is something that I and people I know who are on the public speaking route definitely resonate with. So, for example, when I started public speaking about 3 years ago, it was usually up in front of audiences of, say, 20 people. And I'd always say, oh, I'd try and get a friend into the building. And then I got comfortable with 20 people. Then it got to 50 people. Then I needed a friend into that audience. And then it got to 100 and then 200. And now I'm quite comfortable speaking to, say, 200 to 300 people. But initially, I always felt so much more comfortable knowing that there was a friend in the audience that I could make eye contact with at any given time. And it would just give me this sense of calm and security that I would otherwise have lacked if it was just a room full of strangers.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I do a lot of public speaking as well. And even if I'm not able to bring a friend, what I often like to do is I like to get there a little early and meet a few people,
Hmm. Hmm.
because then they kind of become your instant, I wouldn't say friends, but your instant acquaintances, right? So
Yeah.
then you have sort of like a little bit of what you're talking about already there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, that makes sense as well. And I've done that too, where, you meet a few people and you say, hey, come along to my talk. And they're like, oh, I'd love to see you speak. And then you see them in the audience, and it just makes things a lot easier. So that's a great little hack as well. And I guess in the context of innovation for our audience, which is predominantly made up of corporate executives working in the innovation space and entrepreneurs, I mean, sharing ideas and building upon the ideas of others from completely different backgrounds tends to generate those breakthroughs, those breakthrough aha moments. However, in an organizational context, if we're afraid to speak our minds in a meeting because we're scared of jumping out of our comfort zone, or, while we may be saving ourselves some sort of momentary discomfort, we're actually doing ourselves a disservice in the long term.
Oh, there's no question. I think that there's a lot of examples that I heard from entrepreneurs around stepping outside your comfort zone. One was participating in meetings, sharing ideas. Another one is another one I heard a lot was tinkering with prototypes. Like, people afraid, because I find, at least, and a lot of entrepreneurs who spoke to me told me that the very best way to kind of fast track a product, idea, or service to market is to get feedback and have a revision, and then get feedback and revise, like beta version 1, 2, 3, 4. But if you're afraid to put it out there, and you kind of hold on to it and tinker with it, and then sort of rationalize to yourself, oh no, I'm not ready yet, and so on and so forth, that's like an innovation killer. But a lot of that has to do with stepping outside your comfort zone, if you think about it. And so I heard a lot of stories about that.
Yeah, and that reminds me of the entrepreneurial mantra, which is done is better than perfect.
Exactly, because you're getting feedback, and then you can sort of do it again. I also heard a lot of discomfort around pitch meetings, but that's a very specific situation because, and also networking. Networking is, to become an entrepreneur, you've got to network, right? You've got to network to build up your contact base, to be able to potentially get investors and so on. And, networking for a lot of people combines selling and small talk, which are like two of the most difficult things kind of fused together. So, there are a lot of challenges, I think, in the entrepreneurial space in terms of stepping outside your comfort zone, for sure.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. And how much of this, Andy, goes back to, say, our reptilian brains, or perhaps our limbic systems and the amygdala, which from an evolutionary perspective is there to protect us from harm?
Well, I think a lot of it does. It's a fight. Ultimately, I think it boils down to your fight-flight reaction. So if you're experiencing anxiety, right, our reptilian brains were taught to avoid anxiety. Like, if something makes us anxious and fearful, we go away from it. We flee, which is actually very useful. Like if a bear is coming at you or something, right? You don't want to sit there and ponder and say, let me see, is this bear
Start philosophizing.
Yeah, exactly. You want to bolt. You want to run. But the problem is that when we sort of apply that same fight-flight reaction to situations in our daily lives, when we're trying to grow and develop, right, as professionals, and maybe flight or fleeing or avoiding is actually not the most sensible thing for us to do. But the problem is that every part of us is sort of edging in that direction. And so the key thing that I found was to apply the tools that I talk about in the book to nudge yourself to taking a leap. Because if you can take that leap, right? And by the way, I don't think taking a leap for a lot of people is as easy as it's portrayed on the internet. Like, oh yeah, just jump off, just jump off the cliff. I think some people can do that, but I think a lot of people really struggle. But if you can apply the tools I talked about to nudge yourself to take a leap, what ends up happening is you start discovering stuff. You start to discover oftentimes this isn't as hard as I thought it was. And you might discover, and I heard so many people say this, I'm not as bad at this as I thought I was, right?
Yeah.
Those discoveries, that learning, then sort of catalyzes a different spiral. Instead of avoiding, you're starting to approach, you're starting to try, and then something becomes less fearful, and so on and so forth. So that is the key. The whole inflection point, the critical tipping point, is actually getting yourself to take the leap.
Yeah, and on the tools in your book, you've outlined 3 questions people should ask to help them get out of their comfort zone around doomsday scenario, dream scenario, and their most realistic scenario. Let's talk about that. Yeah,
sure. So that was another. So we had conviction, customization, and clarity. And here we're talking about clarity, the idea that when we are anxious, when we are fearful, that fear can sort of take hold of us and bring us immediately to like the worst possible case situation. So we were talking about public speaking before, like you're presented with a public speaking opportunity. Like the other day, for example, not the other day, about a month and a half ago, I was asked to do a TED Talk. And if the fearful part of my brain took hold of me, it would have said, I am not doing this. I am afraid I'm going to faint on stage, and I will make a fool out of myself in front of millions of people. Right? That's the doomsday scenario. Right? Now, what's in some ways equally challenging is the best case sort of idealized scenario, because that's dangerous too, which would be, I'm only doing this talk if I am like the best TED talker ever. I mean, ever,
Yeah.
right? Of course, never done it, but I'll only do it if I'm the best ever. And so those are the two extremes, like the idealized, unrealistic, positive extreme, and then the sort of probably equally unrealistic doomsday scenario. And I think a critical resource is finding in claiming sort of that more realistic middle ground. And the people who I found were able to do that were more successful. And that's why I include that exercise in my book.
That's awesome, man. So when's your TED Talk taking place?
Oh, it's done. It's online.
Oh, it's done. It's online. Cool. We'll add that. I'll have a look at that and add that to the show notes for our listeners. So that's all about jumping out of your comfort zone, I take it?
I didn't faint. No, yeah, I was okay.
Awesome, man. Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. I wanted to touch on a couple of other topics which I think are really important for our audience. And one is that on delivering bad news, something that gets most people out of their comfort zones, unless, of course, they're some kind of sociopath. So what tips do you have for our audience when it comes to delivering bad news, Andy?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think that there are a bunch of things to remember. I think it's critical, first of all, to really understand and embrace the reasons why you're delivering the bad news, to really own it, to understand and have conviction about why it's critical to be delivering this bad news. Now, a problem, of course, comes if the buck has been passed to you, right, and it wasn't your decision to deliver the bad news, and you have to deliver it. That makes it trickier. But if you have some ownership or agency in terms of the decision itself, really owning the legitimacy of, in your mind, of why you're delivering this bad news, I think that is essential. That's sort of task number one. Number two, I think, is frankly rehearsing, scripting. Now, it should not be scripted out as in like literally scripted out, but bad news is a tough thing to do. I know myself. I mean, on a minor level, I'm not a top executive, of course, but I have delivered plenty of bad news to young people in my role as a professor, in rejecting articles and books and telling students and disappointing them, when they've worked very hard on things. I also have to tell you that I spent years studying how managers and executives delivered bad news. And so I heard sort of secondhand, I learned about that and the importance of scripting it out, understanding what the message is, not letting it become a if indeed you're delivering a fait accompli, like that someone is fired or laid off, to not let it become a negotiation, not let it be a discussion, right?
Yeah.
Not get into what one manager mentioned. He used the term the but why conversation. But why? And you can't in that moment get yourself hooked into that, because that's not the purpose, and that's not going to help either the person receiving the news or you. In a corporate setting, I think that it's critical to. A lot of corporations do this quite well. There's maybe an HR person alongside a line manager to be able to deliver the more technical piece of the news in terms of a severance package and so on. The other thing I'd say about delivering bad news is there is a delicate balance between sort of involving your own feelings and emotions in the situation. You certainly don't want to sort of express your sorrow when delivering bad news, because that's not going to help the person receiving the news, right? But at the same time, you also don't want to detach. You don't want to go robotic. You don't want to distance yourself, because that's not going to show empathy. So there's a fine line between sort of over emoting and under emoting. And I found that the people who are most experienced at that were able to kind of hit that middle ground. So it is a tough situation, but it's something that I've been inspired by watching and hearing about stories of people who have been able to do it in a very empathic, compassionate, but effective way.
Now, there's some very valuable insights there for our audience on delivering bad news, and something as an entrepreneur you'll probably have to get into the habit of doing quite often, especially if you've got investors on board and you're not tracking to those performance metrics. But I guess I wanted to digress a little and discuss Andy Molinsky, and I understand you've gotten out of your own comfort zone in the past. But perhaps talk me through, Andy, some of the emotions you encountered jumping out of your own comfort zone and how you bridged your own behavioral gap.
Oh yeah. I mean, the whole enterprise of becoming an author, becoming, even though I cringe myself at the term, a thought leader.
Hey,
I
you
find
can
that
use it, man. It's all good.
you know the whole experience. No, as of in 2012, I guess 2013, I was not on any social media:
Hmm.
Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, nothing. I had to, when I became an author for the first time, which was 2013, my first book, which was called Global Dexterity.
Hmm.
I learned all this. I had to start tweeting, I had to start posting, I had to start doing all these things that are outside my comfort zone. Remember, I was trained as a researcher, as an academic, and
Yeah.
so I've kind of learned all this stuff from scratch. I still feel awkward and uncomfortable whenever promoting myself, and I find that I always constantly feel like I'm promoting myself. And it's a fine line though, because if you don't sort of if you don't put yourself out there and say what you've done and what you're interested in, how else are people going to know?
Mm.
So that's one of the things I tell myself. For example, I've emulated other people. I've looked out and seen how other people do it and tried to pick and choose from their style pieces that seem to fit me. I've discarded other parts that don't fit me. Sort of, I've cobbled together a style that feels authentic, kind of enough for me. And then we talked about public speaking. That's a good example. I initially, so about 20 years ago, I was terrified of public speaking. This is when I first started being as a professor. It's actually a really
Yeah.
bad combination if you're a professor and you're terrified of public speaking. But I used to carry notes with me. I would literally read off notes, and then maybe about 5 years later, I ditched the notes, and now I actually love public speaking. I really enjoy it. So I but that's a long process. So I feel like, and then doing a lot of corporate work.
Mm.
That initially was outside my comfort zone, and now I really enjoy it. It's one of my most favorite things to engage the people in corporations, just because I love to learn about sort of the real world challenges they're facing, and then sort of come back to the shop and try to figure out ways to understand it and frameworks that can be helpful to them. So,
Mm.
I think that this is all stuff I've chosen. I could have decided not to do any of this, stayed in my office and continued to write exclusively for other academics and journals and so on. And I still do some of that for sure, but I've always wanted to make a difference, and a bigger difference. And so it's required me to step outside my comfort zone.
Mm. Yeah, and it sounds as if it's also helped you grow as a person, but also create more impact in the world. And here we are, chatting from the other sides of the world, and this will be going out to 100,000 people and hopefully affecting more and more people than you possibly could just by lecturing at a university.
Absolutely. I absolutely believe that. And I'm thankful for being able to do this.
Fantastic. And Andy, I wanted to ask something which I guess comes from a personal place where, I mean, I find that, I like jumping out of my comfort zone. I've alluded to that a few times in this podcast. But then there are times where, for example, we just had a 3-day weekend here in Melbourne, and I tried to spend time away from work. I literally spent one day hibernating. And did you uncover in your research that this was something that people did where, they jump out of their comfort zone, they drive forward, they try all these crazy things, but then they need time to just decompress and recharge and just be normal?
Yeah, I mean, I could see that. I could see, to try to sort of have an equilibrium and a balance. I remember, so part of my research, I didn't mention it earlier, but was with police officers. And one of the situations they struggled with was evicting families from their homes. And so I actually
Mm.
took a day, and in addition to, I hung out there at the police station for about a month interviewing them, but I also went in a cop car one day, and along with two officers, as they performed 20 evictions in the city.
Wow.
And I got to witness it firsthand. And then I got to see how people would come back and decompress. There was a gym there. They would work out at the gym. They would hang out and eat donuts and I know it's a bit of a cliche that cops eat donuts, at least in the United States, but it's true. It was true, at least where I was. But so I saw sort of like the decompression in terms of that kind of extreme comfort zone type of situation. I also found, sort of in people's everyday lives, a lot of people describing sort of their life as almost like you'd think of a portfolio of stocks and bonds, right? You sort of have, I think a lot of people feel that it's important to have a diversified portfolio.
Yeah.
And I think if you sort of like take that analogy to the world of comfort zones, if all the situations that you're encountering in your life are in the step outside my comfort zone bucket, that's going to be a pretty tough life to lead, right?
Yeah.
You sort of people, it seems that it's certain, there's a collection of situations that we have, some of which we're fully ensconced in our comfort zones, and that's fantastic because that's a go-to place for sort of rejuvenation, sort of flow, relaxation, and so on, unplugging. But then there are other aspects of our lives where we are sort of pushing the edge. But to have that balance within our portfolio of life, I think was helpful as well. I try to follow that one.
Yeah. And it's like when people say you should live each day to the fullest, and hey, you could live each day to the fullest, but probably won't be a very long life.
Exactly. Unless you're one of these crazy people that has unlimited energy. I know a few of those.
Yeah, they are out there, but they seem to be an anomaly. Well, thank you so much, Andy, but I cannot let you go without throwing you into our 3-question lightning round. Are you ready to rock and roll?
Sure.
Let's do this. So question number 1, Andy, is if you could work for any organization at any stage of the company life cycle, regardless of what era, what year, what century, which company would it be and why?
Wow, that's a good one. I think that I have to say I would love to work for the federal government in the United States.
Wow, that's a first.
No, I not just out of pure curiosity. I think that it feels like such a black box to me, and I think that if I had to. If I had to sort of jump in and be a fly on the wall, you can pick your recent administration. I think that would be a fascinating experience. So that's one that immediately pops to mind. Yeah, probably not your typical one, right?
No, definitely not. Would there be a particular administration that jumps out?
I think Obama. I think that would have been very interesting to be in the Obama administration.
Yeah.
So that pops out in my mind.
Excellent. Question number 2, Andy, is if you could ask anyone a question, dead or alive, who would it be and what would you ask?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. Anyone a question, dead or alive? I'm gonna have to think about that one.
We can circle back.
Right. How about asking Steve Jobs what he would have done, what he was envisioning next for the future of Apple if he had more time in his life and on his hands. If he were able to, if he didn't succumb to cancer, and if he would have been able to lead a fuller life, what would have his plans been? How would have he reacted to the competitive landscape that Apple faces right now? That would have been a fascinating thing to know.
Yeah, that is a great question to ask Steve Jobs, and it seems as if Apple, for all the hype that you hear in the media about them working on X, working on Y, working on Z, there seems to be very little by way of, those breakthrough innovations. The last big thing really was the iPad, and since then all we've had is increments, version 7, version 8, version 9. So yeah, that's a great question. And lastly, the question is on lifestyle design. So we've already talked about how Andy Molinsky has gone from academic to author to shameless self-promoter and all that good stuff. I guess I'm curious to jump into your mind a little bit more and basically find out what kind of rituals or routines you have to help you stay on top of your game.
Yeah, sure. In terms of everyday work rituals, one is that I tend to think of days in terms of segments. I think of days in terms of 3 segments, and I do not know why I do this, but I do. And I think of there's a morning segment, an early afternoon segment, and then sort of like a later segment, which could be later afternoon or early evening segment. And I always think to myself, if I'm very productive, even to the point of breakthrough productive in one of the 3 segments, I've had a pretty decent day. If I can hit 2 of them, that's an awesome day. And then 3 is just a grand slam. So that's one way that I tend to think of my life, because I don't think of my life in terms of literal hours and minutes. I think of it sort of in a broader way. The other productivity hack idea that I have is I'm very, very conscious of the idea that in the work that I do, which is really thinking work, that I could be working and banging my head at a problem and staring in front of a computer, which I never do, but if I were to, sort of like, not stopping for weeks upon a time and not come up with something, versus take my dog for a walk around the neighborhood and have an epiphany that would be worth about a month's work. Right.
Yeah.
And so in the work that I do, in the field that I work in, it's all about these breakthroughs and innovative ways of thinking. So what I mean in the hack is really understanding what enables you to be at your best, understanding when you're not at your best, and realizing that you've got to switch activities and modes to try to sort of reclaim that creative space. So I do that all the time. I'll start working in the morning and I'll say to myself, this isn't working, got to go exercise.
Yeah.
Go exercise, come back, have a cup of coffee, and then all of a sudden a breakthrough happens. But I think there are a lot of people who sort of have this sort of stick-to-itness to their routine and don't just power through, but in the end actually don't get much work done.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because it's one thing to just sit at your desk for, say, 14 hours straight and say, hey, I've been really productive today, I've been really driven, but how many of those hours were you actually at your best? Particularly if you're doing creative work, you need to get away from your desk, get it into a different environment. If you're used to working at the same desk, maybe go out, work in a cafe, maybe go for a long walk, go work out. There's nothing wrong with that, because it will foster those breakthroughs that will help you, 80-20 and 10x your business or whatever it is, rather than just going for the incremental improvements every day.
Yeah, there's no question. It's funny. I think I get my most creative ideas in motion, meaning when I'm walking, I ride an exercise bike, when I'm riding an exercise bike, when I'm walking, sometimes in the car. It's funny. If I reflect on it, it's in motion. Yeah. I don't know why, but it does.
Yeah, it's a funny one, because I also find that when you're absorbing, say, content, if I'm listening to a podcast or an audiobook, for example, I'm going to absorb a hell of a lot more if I'm walking while listening, as opposed to just sitting down with a pair of headphones on.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I have the same thing. I have a dog, and I walk my dog a lot, and it's good. It's good for health and so on. And I love my dog, but I'm telling you, I get good ideas during the dog walk. I'm constantly stopping and typing something into my phone. Yeah. I come back and I'm clearer. It's just it's not a time waster. It's an absolute sort of time saver in a way.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, Andy. That's a great way to leave our audience. So you've left our audience with a lot of value bombs on jumping out of their comfort zone, and I hope they'll listen to this again and again and take their notes on their iPhones while they're going for a walk with their dog, and hopefully start putting some of this stuff into action. On the book, people can find it on Amazon. It's called Reach, and your last book was called
Global Dexterity,
and that's also available on Amazon. People can find you at andymolinsky.com. That's Molinsky with a Y. They can find you on Twitter at Andy Molinsky, and of course you're also on LinkedIn. Is there anywhere else they should go to find out a little bit more about you and connect?
No, that's good. I think the website's the best place, and if you spell my name wrong, the beauty of it is that I bought 2 URLs of the most common misspellings, so we'll see if you hit one of those.
What's the other one?
It's people. So my name is spelled Molinsky. A lot of people mix up the K and the S at the end, and then a lot of people think that it's with an I instead of a Y.
Interesting. It's funny. In my case, Glavesky, I have so many people that will either pronounce it or write it down Galevsky and put the A in front of the L, which I've never really understood how that works, but it happens so often.
Yeah, it's funny.
Okay, Andy, thank you so much again for giving up some time to speak to the audience of Future Squared. Hope you enjoy the rest of your night in sunny Boston, Massachusetts.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Andy. Hey guys, it's Steve again. If you're picking up what we're putting down, we'd love it if you took just a minute of your time to like, share, or subscribe to Future Squared on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. It would mean a hell of a lot to the team here who work effortlessly to bring you thought leaders and experts on topics of corporate innovation, entrepreneurship, and self-improvement on a weekly basis. As always, you can find more resources on innovation, including blogs, books, podcasts, videos, webinars, and tools at www.collectivecamp.us. If you'd like to connect with me on Twitter, you can do so at Steve Glaveski. That's Glaveski. Until next time, keep innovating. Future Squared out.